Alright, good morning everyone. I'm Justin Kelly.
I'm Jared Bell.
My name is Quentin.
And we're going to be talking about the lessons that we learned from the 1964 Great Alaska Earthquake. So before we start, just a quick overview of the earthquake. Magnitude 9.2 on the Richter scale and an intensity of 11 on the Mercalli scale. So it's just about as powerful as you can get. It's the second most powerful earthquake ever recorded and the largest in North American history. The only one bigger was in Chile just 4 years before. And it happened on Good Friday, March 27th, 1964. So a lot of people also called it the Good Friday earthquake. And when we were looking at the earthquake, we kind of found three main things to take away from it. The first is about plate tectonics, the second is about tsunamis and after effects, and the third is about the probability of future earthquakes in the area. So, the first takeaway is that this earthquake really proved plate tectonics. And as we've talked about in class over the last week or so, plate tectonics is the theory that Earth's crust is composed of large plates that are constantly moving at slow, very slow rates, about a couple centimeters a year. And in 1964, when this earthquake happened, it was still a very new theory. People didn't know a lot about it. And as you can see from the diagram, there's really three types of zones where plates meet up. And that's where earthquakes tend to happen. The top zone where the plates are pulling away from each other is called divergence. The middle zone, where the plates are kind of meeting and one's diving under the other, is called a convergent zone, and that's what we had in Alaska. And then the bottom one is a strike slip area. And so like I said, this one is the one we had in Alaska. And so anyway, how the quake proved plate tectonics. So after the earthquake occurred, they sent a geologist named George Plafkirk to investigate the area. And what he found is where the earthquake occurred was on top of what's called the Alaska Aleutian Subduction Zone. And that is where the Pacific Plate meets the North American Plate, and they're the two largest plates that cover the Earth. And the Pacific Plate dives under the North American Plate. And after centuries of pressure building up, the Pacific Plate just kind of gave way and dove underneath about 50 feet. So some parts of Alaska had risen, sometimes as much as 30 or 40 feet up into the air, and others had dropped, sometimes an equal amount. And they named this type of earthquake a megathrust earthquake because it really didn't have an epicenter. It kind of ran in a straight line underneath Alaska, and almost 600 miles of fault ruptured when the Pacific Plate gave way. So here are some photos taken shortly after the earthquake. You can see it just destroyed. The roads are split in half. It's almost like the forests were turned on their sides and stuff was raised and dropped 10, 20 feet. So, Plafkirk also found evidence of similar earthquakes in the past. What he found was that 9 similar earthquakes had occurred in the last 5,500 or so years. That's an average of about 1 every 630 years. And so we determined that a megathrust earthquake is a result of hundreds of years of friction built up, so 500 or 600 years, and eventually that pressure finally releases, and that's what causes the earthquake. So the Pacific Plate slid almost 60 feet in 5 minutes, and most earthquakes only last 30 seconds to a minute, and this was 5 full minutes. So a quick diagram right here, and you can see where it says 1964, right along that red zone is really where the earthquake occurred. And most of the damage was done up in here to Anchorage and the surrounding areas. But you can see how there was no epicenter, it just kind of occurred all along that fault.
So, I'll be talking about the after effects of this tsunami, and also how they generated. So, how it was generated was by this the line right there, and it went upward and caused an upward wave. And like and it says like large vertical displacements over an approximately 200,000 square mile area along the source fault. And this vertical displacement generated a major tectonic tsunami. The violent shaking caused many large landslides and submarine slumps. One of the areas that affected was Alaska, of course. It was said that tsunami caused a lot of deaths and property damage, and 5 communities were damaged. It was Valdez, Seward, Homer, Kodiak, and Whittier. And Valdez was the most affected community because the sediment that was placed under the ground, it wasn't very stable, and when the earthquake happened, the fault started like shaking and stuff. And it says communities wave height range from 30 feet to 100 feet, 170 feet, and 170 feet was the highest was in Valdez. Another area that was affected was the U.S. West Coast. It says the 1964 tsunami is the largest and most destructive ever in the U.S. And it said the tsunami did damage in 3 states in the West Coast was Oregon, California, and Washington. The 3 states had a combined 18 million in damage and 16 deaths. So that can show you how damaging it was as a tsunami. The other effects was in Hawaii and other Pacific locations. Waves reached 12.5 feet in Palu, then 11 feet in Kalu, then only 1 foot in Kani. And when the tsunami reached Japan, it wasn't as high because how far it reached. It was 3 to 10 inches high. Then due to the orientation of the generating fault, there was not much damage done. And in this picture, you can see like the time lapse right there, and this is where it started and stuff. Then it reached down to the West Coast. Then it goes to Hawaii and stuff. Then the wave amplitude, it shows like the different ranges with the colors and stuff. When it says right there in Alaska, it was above 10 feet. Then right here, it shows like 3 feet and above. And other locations, and like Japan and stuff, it wasn't shown as much.
It also affected how we see earthquakes. So before the earthquake happened, people weren't really aware of earthquakes, and people attempted to study the San Andreas Fault, but they never really they never got off the ground. After the earthquake, the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, which became the USGS, reported the earthquake, and follow-up to the study eventually led to the Earthquakes Hazard Reduction Act of 1977. And in 1969, the USGS created a 10-year earthquake hazard program in order to help future earthquakes. Some towns in Alaska moved to higher ground, like Seward, Valdez, Girdwood, and Shenega. The Alaska Tsunami Warning Center was created in 1967, and the earthquake was registered in all U.S. states except for Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Delaware. And the data helped develop earthquake-resistant structures like buildings. So people build buildings now, they plan for earthquakes. Environmental effects in the Anchorage area, which is the largest city in Alaska. The earthquake temporarily changed the groundwater levels in the Anchorage area. Water supplies in the area were also interrupted by snowslides on streams and sanding in the wells, and the land level in the area was lowered by 3.7 feet. Here are some pictures. The picture on the top is a penny store, and the picture on the bottom is a school in Anchorage that was severely impacted by the earthquake.
All right, so just kind of a brief conclusion. George Plaffer's subduction zone finding was very important, linking the earthquakes caused to plate tectonics. And after it happened, they really learned the major effects of tsunamis and also aftershocks, because tsunamis weren't the only thing that happened. And finally, the earthquake really changed how America viewed earthquakes as a hazard. So that's all we've got, and our references were put in our slides individually. So thank you.
Questions?
Can you go to your first slide, please? Like your first slide of your introduction.
Like the
very
vital
first
The
one.
very
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? So what do you think the main lesson that was learned for places outside of Alaska from this earthquake?
I think honestly that they can affect areas that aren't close to the epicenter, especially with the tsunamis. So you really have to be prepared and have like alerts out just in case anything happens, so that you can get a warning out, try and like prevent as much damage or loss of life that you can, especially with tsunamis.
And what do you think the likelihood that an earthquake like this could happen again in Alaska?
Forever, I feel like it would take like many years, like for another thing for this like to happen. Like how great of an earthquake this was. This says it was like most destructive in the West Coast and second most violent in the world history. So I don't know, it might take more like 2 years or like 100 years.
Yeah, I mean they found evidence of one every 600 years or so. So I mean, if it happened again, it would probably be a long time in the future.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Then thank you.